You're listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 184. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Jeremy Scott, who is a writer and entertainer from Nashville, Tennessee. He's the co-creator and narrator of CinemaSins, a YouTube channel dedicated to movie-related comedy with over 9 million subscribers. I've been following CinemaSins on YouTube for a year or two, so I was excited to find out that Jeremy Scott has a thriller novel that was coming out, so it was fun to have him on the podcast. His thriller, When the Corn is Waist High, was published on April 19th. So go pick that up and check it out. Before I get to the interview, you can find me on Twitter at Thrilling Reads and also by my name at Alan Peterson, both on Twitter over there. Go and say hi. And you can also go to thrillingreads.com/links for all my social media links, newsletter, and all that good stuff. You'll find it all there in one page. And best way to support this podcast is to let other fans of thriller and mystery books know about it. So please do shoot your friends an email or text message, or if you hang out in a forum or a Facebook group that focuses on mysteries and thrillers, I would appreciate a shout out to this podcast. And you can also, of course, then support the show by heading over to the place where you listen to it. Make sure you're subscribed to it there and leave a rating. Much appreciated. It helps me get the word out and let other fans of the genre find the podcast. So it's all much appreciated. All right, here is my interview with Jeremy Scott. Hey, everybody, this is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. And on the podcast today, I have Jeremy Scott. He's the co-creator and narrator of CinemaSins, a YouTube channel dedicated to movie-related comedy with over 9 million subscribers. His thriller novel, When the Corn is Waist High, will be published on April 19th. Welcome to the podcast, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. I was saying I've enjoyed your YouTube channel, CinemaSins, over the last couple of years. So what led a YouTuber to writing a thriller novel? Is that something you always wanted to do?
Oh boy, I've been writing since I was a kid. I started out writing really terrible songs when I was taking piano lessons. I wrote some poems. I got to college and I got really into film, so I wrote a couple screenplays that were also terrible. Then I joined a band and I started writing some rock songs. And then once we started the YouTube channel and started to get a little bit of a following, I realized we had a potential platform. And I got serious about writing something that we could put out there. And that led to my first novel, which originally self-published, called The Ables, which is about a group of superhero teens that are all disabled, and their disabilities interfere with their ability to be superheroes. And that did pretty well. And I landed with a publisher who wanted to publish the rest of that series. And then, just like any book that I've written, which is now, I guess this is my 5th book, it has to be an idea that won't leave me, I never set out to write a thriller. I just had an idea, told my wife, thought it was neat. And then 2 months later, I'm still thinking about it. And that's about the time that I realized I better start typing.
Yeah, because they're different genres, right? YA and the thriller. So that's kind of, is there a difference when you're writing in the different genres, or is the process kind of the same for you?
It's the process changes every time. I feel like I learn something different every time. So the first book that I wrote, I sat down and I wrote. And when I got to the end, I was like, oh, I have to cut and edit so much because I didn't have a plan when I was writing. So the second book, I had a general outline, and that made things a lot smoother. But in that book, I also learned about setting things up for the future books. And so, my process is honed a little bit every time, I think. But in terms of every one of the books I've written has been in first person, which is the most natural way for me. And so it does have that in common with the previous books. And I'm not sure anything about my routine really changes.
Were you a fan of the genres that you write in as a reader before you started actually trying to write them? Or
it's interesting that you say that. And I hope I don't turn off any listeners. Not particularly. I have, as a reader, I was a big Tom Clancy reader for a long time. I really like Andy Weir's books, Today, The Martian, and Project Hail Mary. But I have never read a lot of young adult stuff. That's just the genre my idea happened to live in. And yeah, I've never read a Stephen King book, even though people tell me they're great. I've just never really been, as a reader, drawn to that genre. But when I had the idea, that's the genre where this idea lived. And the next thing I'm working on is a short story anthology of sci-fi stories. So I just kind of go where the nugget of an idea takes me.
And so, can you tell us about the when the coin is waist high? What's that about? How that all came to you and the process for that?
I can't tell you how it came to me because that is one of the 2 or 3 big secrets waiting in the book.
Oh, okay.
But I can tell you that the setting of the book is probably what's most personal to me. This is a fictional town in Indiana that is modeled on a town I actually lived in, with 2,000 people, no stoplights, no fast food, one grocery store, and a lot of farmers. And I was also a preacher's kid at that time. And so I really love that period of my life. That's probably the most nostalgic I get, thinking back on that tiny, tiny community and how, everybody sort of knows everybody, or at least of everybody. And so that's sort of the setting for this. And we have a character that is both a local priest of a Catholic church, but is also has been elected sheriff of this tiny town and police force of 5 people. And the book begins with him discovering a pretty gruesome murder and realizing that he's in way over his head. And it turns out they have a serial killer. And so then he ends up having to try and investigate these crimes while also fending off the mayor, the FBI, everybody else that wants to basically come in and take the case away from him. And that's maybe as much as I want to give in terms of a general synopsis. But I don't think it's a very traditional murder mystery.
Yeah, I think the character is so cool because it's like you said, he's a priest and a sheriff. Do you know if that's is that anybody out there in real life? You think like that? Was that inspired by anybody? Do you know? Or
no, I mean certainly inspired by members of the clergy that I've met throughout my life. No, I just remember that there are communities here and there, especially back 40 years ago, where sheriffs that are elected aren't necessarily full of law enforcement background. There are sometimes political leanings involved in these kind of elections. And so basically the way the book explains it is the church board rallied behind him and funded his campaign and really pushed him to be sheriff because they thought it would be good for the entire community to have a person of faith sort of also manning the law. But no, I've never met anybody that had both those professions, though I'm sure it certainly happened somewhere.
It reminds me of the National Lampoon's Vacation, where the mechanic is a sheriff.
Yeah.
Small town way of going. And so, as I was kind of curious too. Now, so you said now you're working on something that's more in the sci-fi realm. So is this a standalone novel, or is it going to be a part of a series, or what's your plans with it?
I would call it a standalone novel that my publisher has asked me to consider writing a sequel to. But just to say, there's certainly room there for more stories, but I didn't write it that way with that in mind, and I might even need a little convincing because I think it works so well as a standalone. But we'll just wait and see how well it's received, and if people like it enough, and if I get another idea that inspires me, I could certainly come back to this universe.
Yeah, that's pretty good though, for the publisher to come back and say, "Yeah, well, how about a series?" That's good problem to have.
Yeah, the email was like, "Hey, have you had any ideas?" And I went to my wife and I was like, "This is probably a really good sign. They might like this book."
And so, kind of curious to know with your whole writing process, and we have writers that listen to this podcast, so I always ask these questions. Like, do you do a lot of research then, or what's your writing process like? Do you outline? Do you write by the seat of your pants?
Yes, I do both. My outlines are very general. I won't start writing until I know the main 5-6 story beats that I want to hit. But then I allow myself flexibility and freedom in between those story beats to get there by the seat of my pants, if you will. So I think that works best for me. I think some writers would structure everything out, but I am just spontaneous enough. I have to leave myself a little bit of room, and it really works. In this book, as an example, I wrote a murder victim named Vernon. And the way that I write is I write every night for a few hours, and then the next night I read what I wrote the previous night and then write another couple hours. And so a week or so later, I was writing another murder because this is a serial killer story, and I named the character Vernon. And I realized only the next day when I went back to reread everything that I had just used the same name twice for two different victims. And I laughed. And then I started thinking, maybe there's a way I can use this. And I ended up writing it in as like this small town quirk where there's these two Vernons and they hate each other. And there's, Vernon A and Vernon B, and everybody knows that they're not friendly with each other. And I just basically turned what was an accident into what I hope is just another charming element of this small town. And if I structured everything out before I ever wrote, I would never have had that moment of discovery.
Yeah, that is cool. Yeah, because I think that's how come when you're writing something, you use the same name. Never thought of like, oh, maybe I can incorporate into that story. That's a good idea.
Right.
Yeah. And so you say you work at night. So then that's really great too, because so do you try to like write every day? I'm assuming you write a lot for your other for Cinema Sins and the other jobs that you have. So
right.
So writing is a part of your process every day.
Yes. If I'm not writing for one of my own books, I'm writing for work, or I'm writing an essay or a nugget of a story idea that I'll tuck away for the future. I do find it important for me to write every day when I'm able. Clearly, there are times when I'm on vacation or just too busy that I don't get to it. But yeah, it just works out at night. My wife goes to bed. Everything gets dark and quiet in the world. There's nothing much on television, and I can just sort of focus with no distractions. That's why it works best for me.
And now with this, the last couple of years, the pandemic and everything, did that change your schedule a lot, or any changes, or you've kind of been self-isolating
it changed. I'm already a little bit of, an introvert in that, I really like people and I want to be around them, but I get anxious sometimes when I am. Mm-hmm. So even pre-pandemic, I didn't do a ton of going out. But it's certainly, I find it was harder to be creative when my environment was the same 24/7, right? Even when before the pandemic, I would only go out a few times a week. That was, stimulating to my brain and my creativity, and just seeing the same desk and the same, shelves and the same screen over and over and over again, because for many months I didn't feel like I could go anywhere safely. Mm-hmm. Was draining. I think any person that is creative, maybe not a lot of, maybe even people who aren't creative in their work, found it mentally draining to just be in the same space over and over and over again.
And I'm kind of curious to always ask about this for my guests. What do you use to write? Do you use Word or some other software? Or
I do use Word. One of my favorite things is how every writer has their own quirk. I wish I could tell you, like, I only type on 1850s typewriters, or I only write by hand in calligraphy, or something really unique story. But no, I use Microsoft Word. I'm a pretty fast typist, and it's just a program that I've been using for 20 plus years that I'm just really comfortable with.
And so you said you usually write from the same spot. You have kind of office space. You don't go to like the coffee shop or something. Well, I guess you write at night, so that'd be kind of hard.
Right. In actuality, the first book I ever wrote, that first Abel's book, I went to the office. My office at that point, I had a day job, but the office was literally 1.2 miles from my house. So I would say goodnight to my wife, and then I would drive to the office and sit at my work desk and write. And that was, in my mind, just to give me a new environment. I don't think it ultimately made that much difference. So yeah, everything else has just been written from my regular at-home work desk that I do everything from.
Yeah, you're so creative with the different areas that you've done. Is there is there a little difference you think from being a creative YouTuber versus a writer, a novelist? Or
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, listen, that first book was like climbing Everest in that it felt like I was never going to be able to do it. It felt like especially when I started, it felt like an insurmountable goal. This is going to take me years and years to ever finish. And once I finished that one, it really gave me a lot of confidence. And so I haven't felt that very much moving forward. I've been like, I can do this. It may take a while, but I've done it once, so I know I can do it again. So when people do ask me for writing advice, I usually say, just write a novel. I don't care if it's crap, just write it. Get that under your belt to know that you can do it. And then you're going to have all this momentum going into the next thing.
And so, what can you tell us about what you're working on next? I know you said it's a short story, but is that something that's going to be out soon, or are you still working on it?
Well, I have another book that's already in the pipeline, already done, and I'm just finishing up the final manuscript. That comes out in the fall. That is the fourth and final book in my Ables series.
No.
That's already basically done. Now, what I'm writing actively is, it's an anthology of science fiction short stories. This is, again, I've never written science fiction. I've never written short stories, but I have found the format to be really freeing, because with a short story, you can leave so much mystery and so much to the imagination, and you can just jump into a place and give a scene that's impactful and then jump back out. So I've really been enjoying it, although I will say most of my stories are relatively bleak to the point that I'm considering calling the anthology bleak. But we will see. I've got about 12 that are in the can and another 20 or so that I'm still working on. So,
and so what's for writing when the corn is waist high? What was the from like the time you started to writing it to now that it's getting ready to get the launch next week? How long did that process take you?
I would say about a year and a half.
Okay.
I pitched the book to the publisher before I had written anything, and they really liked the idea. They have I'm with Turner Publishing, but they have another imprint called Keylight that only puts out 12 books a year. And the idea behind that imprint is that these books are ready-made, supposedly for television and film, which really excited me about their interest in this story. But it wrote really quick. I think I had it finished in about 5 months, maybe 6. And then it's about a year process once the manuscript is initially turned in until it gets published. They have a pretty regimented system. So about a year and 6 months, I would say.
What did you think about the editing process, getting those notes back and all that? How'd that go?
I mean, this it's a learning experience, man, because you have to be able to take those kind of notes without taking them personally.
Yeah.
Which, is easier today than it was for me the first time. I'll be honest. But today I want as much red ink as possible on that thing when it comes back. And I put an enormous amount of faith in these editors to help me shape the story. I figure it's like, a sculpture, but I take the raw stone and I make it kind of look like a specific person. And then the touch-up artist comes in behind me. And when they're done, you're like, oh, that's definitely, Caesar or whoever I sculpted. They're just as much a part of the final product as I am, I think. Because if you read just a raw first pass from me, you would wonder why anybody ever published anything I ever wrote.
The first drafts are always going to be kind of rough, and I think no matter just about everybody.
Yeah.
I was wondering. So now with the launch coming here in the next week, how's that process been for you? Has it been? I know you had a marketing background, which is kind of good for writers because a lot of writers hate that part. How's that been for you so far?
Yeah, I've actually. This has been the most concerted campaign that we've done. I actually hired a couple of people on my end to work with the publisher hand in hand and make sure that we try our best to get this in front of people who like this genre. It's, I think, how I came to meet you and be booked on this show. And I do have a marketing background, and the YouTube channel was all old school hustle. I just cold emailed places like Wired Magazine and said, "Hey, I'll give you an interview if you post this video." And you did that enough the first year that we amassed a lot of coverage. We're trying a similar approach, reaching out to libraries, and focused podcasts and newsletters and blogs and whatnot. But trying not to be very aggressive. Certainly just saying, "Hey, if you're interested, here's this." But I feel very good about it. I don't know how that happened, but I got a starred review at Publishers Weekly on this book, and I'm not sure anyone on my side asked for that. I think they just got a copy of the book and liked it. And again, I'm new to all this, but I'm told that's a pretty big deal, and that a lot of libraries and bookstores look to that. And so I was, really humbled when I saw that. And then, getting to talk to people like you. I've written a couple of really fun articles for blogs focused on true crime stuff. And so, it's been really fun for me. I'm one of those rare authors that actually enjoys doing the marketing part.
I was reading about with a little background on you, like your when you first started the Cinema Sins, you got like 2 million subscribers in like the first year or something. That's crazy. Yeah,
it was really insane. It was the first video we launched. Like, people need to know how lucky we were. We launched one video, and it hit, somebody posted to BuzzFeed, and it hit homepage of BuzzFeed. So we had 150,000 views in one day. And then our third video, another angel from heaven, Kevin Smith, the film director, tweeted out a link to our channel to his, I don't know how many gobs of subscribers he has on Twitter. And then a couple weeks after that, the comedian Dane Cook tweeted out a link to one of our videos. And honestly, those three things, which we had nothing to do with making them happen, are probably the reason we had success as fast as we did. And we will be forever grateful.
Wow. Yeah. Word of mouth. That free publicity.
Exactly.
The best kind.
The best kind.
All right. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And just to let everybody know, the book comes out on April 19th. So this is when you're listening to this, it'll be available. So go check it out. It's going to be available everywhere. Anything else you'd like to say before we sign off? Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at jscotttn. I live in Tennessee, and my name is Jeremy Scott. All I would say is thank you for having me. Thanks for listening, and I appreciate readers who welcome my first step into this thriller community.
All right, Jeremy, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun talking to you.
Thanks. Same here.
Thank you for listening to Meet the Thriller Author. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with one of your favorite writers of mysteries and thrillers, or if this episode's guest is new to you, I hope you give their books a chance. Helping listeners discover new authors and books is one of the coolest outcomes of doing this podcast. As always, you can head over to thrillerauthors.com to sign up to my Thrilling Reads email list. That way you won't miss out on any great deals in thriller and mystery books. You can also check out all the links and resources in the show notes for this episode over at thrillerauthors.com. And also please do subscribe to this podcast if you haven't done so already, and leave a rating and review wherever it is that you're listening to this show. If you have done that already, I thank you. I really do appreciate your support. For my other links to my author website, social media haunts, and more, check out thrillingreads.com/links. All my links will be on that page. So that's it for this episode. See you next time, and stay safe out there.